At 99 years old, Mel Brooks isn't trying to rewrite history. He's sharpening the pencil. He remembers everything and forgets almost nothing. And while he's always been one of Hollywood's loudest laughers, behind the laughter is something deeper, a ledger. He has a quiet mental list of every actor who made the work harder than it needed to be, who walked into his world and thought they owned it. Some names were forgiven, a few got forgotten, but five names carved into the back of his memory like graffiti on the inside of a locked door. For decades, Brooks never said them out loud, not publicly, not to reporters, not even to friends unless they asked the right way. But now he's 99. He's seen nearly a century of comedy come and go, and he's not interested in protecting egos anymore. He's interested in telling the truth. Because Mel Brooks never hated quietly, but he also never hated without reason. Hate for Mel doesn't burn chaotic and loud. It freezes. It becomes a silence, a phone call that stops coming, a line that never gets written, a script that turns to dust in a drawer because one person, ruined the rhythm. That's the kind of hate he's talking about. Cold, clean, absolute. Brooks built his empire on rhythm, not just timing, not just jokes, but that intangible thing that makes comedy breathe. Chemistry, tempo, respect. If one actor didn't share the pulse, the whole organism wheezed, and most directors would try to resuscitate it. Brooks buried it. He'd write you out, rebuild the scene, recast the role, and never look back. Because if you weren't laughing with the rest of the ship, you were dead weight. So when a rare interview surfaced, an audio-only, closed room not for broadcast conversation, where Brooks finally let the curtain fall and casually named the 5 actors he genuinely couldn't stand working with, Hollywood's collective ears perked up. His reasons weren't just personal, they were professional. They revealed a side of him that was always there, just never center stage, the craftsman, not the clown. The one who knew exactly what he needed, and exactly who broke it. He didn't name them in order of pain, or fury, or betrayal. He listed them the way a composer might describe an out-of-tune instrument. This violin couldn't hear the beat. This trumpet played too loud. This drummer never stopped soloing. It wasn't about how famous they were. It was about how wrong they were. The first name he mentioned, a surprise to almost no one, Chevy Chase. Brooks said almost before the question was done being asked. There was no hesitation, no dramatic pause, just 2 words, said in the tone of someone confirming an overdue library fine. Absolutely not, he added. We crossed paths just enough. That was too much. The story of why Brooks never cast Chevy Chase isn't scandal, it's philosophy. On paper, Chevy seemed like a dream, tall, sharp, dry delivery. A star with proven comedic stamina. Studios begged Mel to consider him in the 80s and early 90s. He was free, available, and bankable. But Mel turned him down every time. He didn't even audition Chase. He didn't want to. People close to the production said Brooks had a rule, trust the room, and Chevy didn't trust anyone. He was a monologue pretending to be a scene. Brooks once said, comedy is dance, not fencing. Duels, I choreograph. There was one meeting, a short lunch. Chase arrived 10 minutes late, joked about the food, interrupted the server. He was funny, but only to himself. Brooks didn't laugh, didn't even stay for coffee. When asked later if Chevy was ever a serious option, Mel just smiled and said, if I wanted people who talk over each other, I'd cast Congress. But nothing about the rejection ever made it into the press. Brooks didn't slam doors, and he didn't write open letters. He just let silence do the work. Chevy Chase never appeared in a Mel Brooks film, not even as a cameo, not even as a passing voice. You can search the credits. He's not there, not because he wasn't funny, but because he was incompatible with the very laws Mel built his comedy around. Chevy was orbiting a different planet, and Mel wasn't interested in building a bridge. Even a genius needs to know where their mark is, he said in that rare interview. Otherwise they're just noise. The second name Mel Brooks dropped carried more emotion than spite. It wasn't about ego or attitude. It was about heartbreak. Gene Wilder, he said softly. That one still stings. To outsiders, it sounded impossible. Gene Wilder wasn't just an actor in Brooks's movies. He was the soul of them. The curly-haired lightning rod of absurdity. He The Sweet-Eyed Tornado, the man who turned screaming into art. Wilder appeared in Brooks's biggest and most beloved works. The producers Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein. Together they didn't just write comedy, they rewrote the blueprint. So how could Gene Wilder be on this list? Because hate in Mel's world wasn't born from insult, it was born from distance. After the wild success of Young Frankenstein, which many consider the duo's masterpiece, Wilder brought Brooks another script. He wanted Mel to read it, not just read it, but direct it, maybe star in it, maybe produce it. The whole thing was wrapped in hope. They were riding high off a string of impossible wins, and Gene believed they could stretch the streak. The movie was called The Adventure of Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother. Mel read it. Laughed. He saw the heart in it. Oh! But when it came to commitment, he passed. Not because it was bad, but because he saw something Gene didn't. He wasn't ready to direct. Mel told his inner circle. He had the voice, but not the compass. Wilder took it personally, deeply. Wasn't just bringing his friend a project, he was offering a piece of himself. And when Mel declined, it felt like rejection, not advice. They didn't fight, not out loud, not on a soundstage. But the silence between them grew, day by day, until there weren't any more calls, no more brainstorming lunches, no ideas scribbled on napkins at 1 a.m. Gene made the film without him. Cast Marty Feldman. He brought in Madeline Kahn. Surrounded himself with Brooks' adjacent brilliance, but it didn't click like it used to. The rhythm was off. The chaos didn't sing. People whispered. Insiders asked if there had been a falling out. Both men shut it down. Always gracious, always respectful, always unfinished. Years later they bumped into each other at a live event. Neither had planned to be there. Reunion wasn't dramatic or tearful. It was a handshake, a smile, a joke about something irrelevant, then another. It was enough to melt the frost, but not enough to bring back the fire. They never worked together again. Mel still spoke of Gene fondly in public. He always called him brilliant, sensitive, electric. But in private, he described their break as something deeper than disagreement. He knew where to poke me, he said. He knew how to finish my sentences, and then one day, he finished one without me. The betrayal wasn't personal. It was creative. Wilder had stepped outside the trust circle, and when someone does that in Brooks's world, there's rarely a re-entry point. You can be friends, you can be kind, but the work, once the thread is broken, there's no weaving back. Wilder's departure from Brooks's inner orbit wasn't a bombshell. It was a slow fade, the kind where you don't even notice the lights going out until you're sitting in the dark. That kind of loss leaves scars, quiet ones, and to this day, Brooks ranks the Wilder silence as one of the great regrets of his life. Not because it ended in hate, but because it ended at all. It's the only time I felt someone walk off stage before the final curtain, he said, and I kept waiting for him to come back for one last bow. He never did. The third name came with a little more venom, a little less pain, and a lot more eye roll. Frank Langella. Brooks announced that one was a statue doing stand-up. Langella had prestige, Broadway legend, presence like lightning, tall, cool, elegant. When Mel was casting Dracula, dead and loving it, Langella seemed like a smart bet. Was Dracula in the serious version, and that was exactly the problem. Brooks wasn't making tragedy, he was making chaos. He wanted a Dracula who could go from thunderous monologue to slapstick pratfall in the same sentence. Langella wanted to be regal. Mel wanted ridiculous. The distance between those visions grew every day of rehearsal, until there was no set big enough to hold it. Mel tried. He gave notes, light nudges, even jokes between takes. But Langella played every word like it was gospel. Jokes died in his throat. Chemistry evaporated. Scene partners hesitated. The film began to stall. During a test read, Brooks offered Frank a zinger, a perfectly timed twist on an old line. Langella hesitated, then asked, "Do you want me to mock the text?" Mel didn't blink. "No," he said. "I want you to survive it." Langella lasted another 48 hours. He was out before shooting began. Leslie Nielsen stepped in and transformed the role. He wasn't fighting the comedy. He was feeding it. Langella's name never made it into the press release. Creative differences, polite words for he didn't get the joke. By the time Mel Brooks fires you, The audience may never even realize you were there. Scripts get rewritten, casting calls go silent, a line just never gets said again. But in one case, the fourth on his list, you did see the actor. You saw him in multiple films. You heard the laughs. You assumed everything was golden. Harvey Korman. Now, this one caught people off guard. To comedy fans, Korman was a Brooks staple. Mel trusted him with some of the best material in his arsenal. The mustache-twirling villain in Blazing Saddles, the scheming bureaucrat in High Anxiety, the pompous courtier in History of the World. Part 1. On screen, their chemistry sparkled. Brooks even once called him the anchor in the madness. But under the surface, it was a war of rhythms. Korman cut his teeth on The Carol Burnett Show, where sketch comedy was fluid, loose, filled with mistakes and happy accidents. Korman could improvise like few others. It was used to freedom. Expected to riff, to adjust, to build his laughs from instinct. Brooks didn't work that way. He orchestrated comedy, like jazz from sheet music. The beats were specific. The timing was sacred. Everyone had to hit their mark, not just physically but emotionally. Brooks wasn't chasing punchlines. He was building momentum. Scenes were structured like machines. And Korman, for all his brilliance, kept trying to modify the engine mid-flight. Mel tried to adjust. For a while, during the filming of High Anxiety, tensions began to boil. Korman questioned direction, pitched rewrites, slowed down shooting trying to find better angles for the laugh. Brooks, who usually welcomed chaos if it served the joke, began to shut down. Conversations shortened, notes were passed through assistants, and what had once been creative electricity turned into something colder, a tug of war. No one had to yell, a crew member later recalled. You could feel it. Every scene was a negotiation, like two generals exchanging terms of surrender, line by line. Mel once summed it up bluntly. Harvey wanted to direct, but so did I. Unfortunately, only one of us was the director. The final straw never made it into tabloids or memoirs. It happened between takes, near the end of production, during a scene reset. Korman wanted a moment extended by 4 seconds, for a gesture he insisted would land bigger laughs. Mel disagreed. They went back and forth, quiet, tense. Then Brooks simply pointed to the call sheet and said, "We're not rewriting jazz." The shoot finished. Korman's performance was tight, sharp, and undeniably hilarious. Audiences never noticed a thing, but they also never saw him again. Korman's name vanished from future Mel Brooks projects. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. Comedy's hard enough, Brooks reportedly told a friend. You start negotiating every page, every pause. Suddenly you're working against the joke, and I don't work against comedy. Still, Brooks never denied Korman's brilliance. Even after their professional split, he praised him publicly, called him a key piece of history. But as the years passed, there was no reunion. Korman later admitted in interviews that he wished they'd collaborated again, that maybe he'd overstepped a few moments. But that's the thing about working with Mel Brooks, he'll let you bend the rhythm. But if you break it, the music stops. The fifth name on the list, that one came with no apology, no affection, just a shrug and a story that played like a cautionary tale. Jerry Lewis, Mel said, brilliant, but unworkable. For decades people assumed Brooks and Lewis would work together eventually. Both were comedians, wild, expressive, larger than life. Both pushed physicality to absurd levels. Both wrote, directed, and obsessed over perfection. They even admired each other's innovations. But admiration has limits. When Mel was prepping Life Stinks, the studio floated casting ideas, big recognizable names. They brought up Jerry Lewis. Mel shut the idea down before the pitch ended. Nope, he said. Don't want a second director I didn't hire. The problem with Jerry wasn't talent. It was gravity. He didn't fit into ensembles. He crushed them. He'd take over the energy of a room, rewrite gags, challenge blocking, turn whispers into rewrites. Not out of malice, just instinct. But Mel didn't share power. Not on stage, not behind the lens, not even in the idea booth. My sets aren't collaborative, Brooks said bluntly. They're orchestras. I don't need a second conductor with a solo trumpet screaming over the strings. They met once, a courtesy dinner set up by a producer. Jerry arrived late, sat down, spent 20 straight minutes talking about the decline of American comedy, and didn't ask Brooks a single question. Mel listened, finished his appetizer, then excused himself before the main course. No argument, no insult, he told a friend. But I knew in 20 minutes what it would have taken a full movie set to find out we don't fit. They never worked together, never circled back. When asked in interviews, both men kept it classy. No potshots, just strategic omission. But behind closed doors, Brooks would admit it, Lewis was a black hole of ego. When the set becomes a mirror, he said, "You're not making a movie, you're hosting a seance." It wasn't hate for the man, it was rejection of chaos in the wrong shape. Jerry wanted spotlight and runway. Mel needed precision and rhythm. The two realities couldn't touch without shaking the stage apart. So that was the five. Chase Wilder, Langella, Corman, Lewis. Not the untalented, not the villains, just the ones who crossed the invisible line, the ones who disturbed the rhythm. But before moving on, it's worth asking, why does that line even matter so much to Mel Brooks? Because comedy to Mel was never accidental. It looked wild, it sounded chaotic, it felt like improv, but underneath every scream, pratfall, fart joke, and rapid-fire insult, was a mind playing jazz with surgical discipline. Brooks didn't just direct movies, he composed them. If one note worked against the melody, you heard the sourness instantly, and he never risked letting that echo make it to the final cut. That's why actors who didn't adapt could never survive in his orbit. Not because they weren't funny, but because they couldn't be part of the machine. Mel Brooks wasn't building star vehicles, he was building instruments, ensembles, worlds where the sum had to be much greater than any individual part. That's why he loved casting down, not up. If you walk through his most iconic films, you won't see A-list leads dominating the posters. You'll see character actors, the oddballs, the freaks, the guys who'd been third banana on someone else's sitcom for 10 years, finally getting their moment. Brooks had incredible taste, not just in humor, but in willingness. He didn't need someone who could do funny, he needed someone who could surrender to it completely. That's the context behind the hate. That's what sharpens the edge. It wasn't about grudges, it was about integrity to the work. Talent's not enough, Mel said once. I need zealots, true believers, madmen who'll fall through a trap door and come up drumming. And if you couldn't do that, if you questioned the timing, rejected the adjustment, stood outside the joke looking in, you weren't just wrong for the scene, you were dangerous to the whole production. One hairline crack in the rhythm, and the whole plate spins off the stick. So when Brooks says these are the five, he's not talking about hate in the usual Hollywood sense. There are no scandals attached, no lawsuits, no leaked phone calls, or tabloid feuds. What he remembers is misalignment, silences that threw the machine out of sync, a glance that killed a laugh, a raised eyebrow that made the punchline feel staged. Because when comedy's working, there's music to it. Harvey Korman, for all his timing genius, couldn't stop interrupting the band leader. Jerry Lewis, for all his invention, played every scene like a solo. Langella turned a bite into a sermon. And Chevy Chase, he didn't even pick up the instrument, he picked up the mirror. But of all the five, it's the Wilder story that lingers longest, because it wasn't disruption, it was disconnection, a gorgeous collaboration, slowly unthreaded by ambition, trust that frayed, without malice, but also without recovery. If you listen to Brooks today, in that rare interview where he lists the five, his tone shifts when Gene comes up, softer, raw. He skips jokes, doesn't rehash the past. He talks like a man standing in the same living room where the echo of an old friend's voice used to fill the air. I never replaced him, Mel says. I used other actors, talented ones, but no one ever stepped into that role in my life again. That's how Mel processes disruption, not in explosions, in echoes, and at 99. Those echoes ring louder than ever. There's less patience, less pretense, but still, Mel doesn't name names just to name them. When he talks about the worst, the misfits, the breaks in rhythm, he's not venting, he's warning, because he's seen what happens when chaos stops being controlled. He's seen manic energy ruin a take. He's seen ego crack the floorboards of a scene. He's seen good movies dissolve under the weight of actors who thought they were more important than the story. And still, after all this time, he believes in comedy as religion, its devotion, its sacrifice, and its teamwork. So when people today ask him what makes a great comedic performer, he doesn't say range,
He doesn't name awards or resumes. He says someone who can take a pie to the face and make it feel like Shakespeare. That's why those 5 failed. Not because they weren't capable, but because they made the pie about them. At 99, Mel Brooks isn't rewriting history. He's calling it like he's always seen it, with precision, with musicality, with the memory of every line that didn't land, and every actor who couldn't be trusted with the heartbeat of a bit. Some people say you can forgive anything with time. Mel doesn't agree. I'm not mad anymore, he said in that interview. But I remember, and in show business, memory is sharper than confession. It doesn't fade, it calcifies. Because Mel Brooks didn't need enemies. He just needed you to listen to the rhythm. There quote s one more thing about Mel Brooks's blacklist, maybe the most telling part of all. None of the names on it ever got called out directly. He never humiliated them, never aired a grievance in public, never partook in the modern sport of takedown interviews. Why? Because for Mel, removing someone from his world wasn't about revenge, it was about rescue. Comedy to him was sacred, not in the way poets use the word, but in the way soldiers talk about code. You stick to it, or people get hurt, not physically, but emotionally. When timing dies on set, it's not just a joke that crashes, it's confidence, energy, cohesion. The laughter that binds a room becomes awkward, throat clears. That's what Mel hated. That's what he punished. He didn't send anger through agents or shout across sets. He simply stopped writing for you, stopped casting you. The door didn't slam, it just went soundproof. And that silence, that's how you knew. Actors that lasted with him weren't necessarily the flashiest. Dom DeLuise, Madeline Kahn, Cloris Leachman, they weren't stars when he found them. They became stars because they understood service. They saw themselves as part of Mel's machine. Take Madeline Kahn for example. Unpredictable brilliance, but every second of that unpredictability happened within the lines. She could improvise, yes, but only after mastering the melody. She never disrupted, she riffed. That's the secret to surviving in a Mel Brooks film. You can dance, you can spin, you can juggle flaming violins, but do it on beat, break rhythm, and make it look intentional. That's how you become family. That's how you stay. Brooks hosted a chaotic circus, but the difference between a circus and an accident is choreography. Every scene, every movement, even the wildest stunts, had choreography. And when someone refused to rehearse that dance, or worse, claimed they didn't need it, they were gone. That's why even big names never touched his films. Al Pacino, too intense. Robin Williams, too uncontrolled in the early years. Richard Pryor, brilliant, but unpredictable. And even he had to fight to stay aligned on Blazing Saddles. Mel respected danger, but only if it listened. One casting director on Spaceballs once offered a famous television star for the role of President Scrooge. Big audience draw. Mel asked one question, does he share the joke? Silence. Then share his resume with someone else. That's how tight the filter was. It wasn't arrogance, it was protection. Protection of tone, of voice, of momentum. Because Brooks knew what few directors dared to admit, one wrong voice can turn a classic into a clunker. He watched it happen to others, directors he loved, scripts he envied, all undone by an ill-fitted lead. He once said, a bad actor in the wrong cast is like salt in coffee. Can't unstir it, can't drink it either. That's why he'd rather lose a name than lose the scene. Not once, not twice, every single time. That's why Rick Moranis got the call over Chevy Chase, why Leslie Nielsen replaced Langella at breakneck speed, why Dom DeLuise kept getting cast, even after missing cues, because at the core, he trusted the process. He knew Mel's jokes better than Mel did sometimes. He wasn't acting funny, he was making funny happen. And Mel, ultra-sensitive to discord, knew the split second a scene started to sag, the moment a line dropped out of rhythm, or someone muted a punchline with overthinking. He could feel it in his bones, because that was his gift, not just in writing, or pacing, or grotesque parody, but in detection, the invisible layer of energy that stands between brilliance and boredom. And once that energy cracked, Mel pulled the plug fast. No public judgments, just the quiet closing of a door that never opened again. And people noticed. Industry folks whispered about the Brooks Circle. You were in or you weren't. And once you left, you stayed out, not out of punishment, out of cosmic balance. He called it keeping the world clean. To this day, aspiring actors still talk about the Brooks blacklist like it's folklore. 5 people, some publicly loved, some never cast, some cast, then erased. To make that list wasn't to get famous, it was to vanish from his universe. A universe where chaos was invited, but never unregulated. Where you could scream, cry, stammer, explode, so long as you believed it. Because that's the word Mel used the most, believe it. The audience can smell doubt. They'll laugh only as long as you're laughing first, without flinching. Once you break the spell with ego, doubt or detachment, the whole thing falls apart. And Mel Brooks never allowed a scene to fall apart twice. At 99, Mel Brooks can say anything he wants. There are no more career moves left to make, no agents to impress, no studios to please. At this point, he's not building a legacy, he is one. And that gives his words a kind of nuclear weight. When he praises someone, it holds. When he dismisses someone, it sticks. But the real truth underneath this infamous list of 5 actors he hated working with, it's not really about them. It's about Mel's blueprint. What makes someone beloved in his universe has never been about fame, beauty, prestige, or even versatility. It's been about whether or not they could disappear into the madness. Could they surrender to the logic of the joke? Could they take direction, not just to preserve a take, but to serve the moment? Humility. That's what he values the most. When he talks about Madeline Kahn, it's not her voice or her presence he raves about, it's her listening. She never tried to top the scene, he once said. She joined it, became part of the madness, instead of rising above it. The ones he loved most, he loved because they gave it all to the joke. They didn't need to win the scene. They needed the scene to win. And that's a different kind of greatness, a selflessness most actors don't train for. So no, these 5 actors weren't failures. All were brilliant. All had moments of mastery. 1 or 2 were Hollywood icons in their own right. But with Brooks, brilliance isn't the ticket in. Chemistry is. A bad vibe ruined more scenes than a bad read. Ego killed more takes than flubbed lines. One touch of irony, the wrong kind of irony, could deflate an entire setup. That's why he treated the comedy ensemble like a sacred trust, not a playground. It's also why he never wavered. If someone broke the rhythm, refused the note, questioned the frame, he let them go, quietly, permanently. No fanfare, no Twitter thread, just a hole in the casting list that never filled their name again. At his age, Brooks doesn't want to gossip. He's beyond blunt now, but not cruel. When he tells the story of Chase, or Langella, or Lewis, it's surgical. He walks through the exact moment the rhythm died, as if the moment itself betrayed him, not the person. And when he talks about Gene, you hear it, not hate, hurt. The deepest disruption isn't a clash, it's a severance. He finished the idea without me, Brooks said, almost whispering. How do you follow someone when they've already left the room? That's the kind of heartbreak you bury, not because it's shameful, but because there's nothing to repair. Still, he doesn't delete them from the story. At 99, Mel Brooks tells it all. The laughs, the fights, the silences, the last days on set. He tells it not to scandalize, but to teach. There's a message buried in every omission, every casting change, every unspoken reunion that never happened. Respect the rhythm, respect the timing, respect the space between the lines, the tone, the crew, the world the director's building, and your tiny role within it. Because if you can do that, if you can check your ego at the soundstage door and step into someone else's imagined chaos, you don't just get the job, you stay in the job. That's the real Mel Brooks secret. Longevity, through loyalty. Trust, as the ticket to immortality. The laughter was never an accident, it was the result of discipline disguised as madness, the reward for rhythm, for courage, for surrendering to absurdity, and meaning every second of it. Because the ones who nailed it, oh did they shine. Leachman, Kahn, DeLuise, Moranis, Feldman, Boyle. You watch them decades later, and the jokes still hit. Not because they had sharper lines, but because no one fought the orchestra. They marched together, stumbled together, hit the wrong note together, until the right one appeared, and when it did, they trusted it. And maybe that's the final lesson hiding inside this list of 5 actors who didn't make the cut. Comedy Unforgiven isn't a punishment, it's a mirror. Not of them, of what the work truly demands. So next time you watch a Mel Brooks movie, watch closely. Look for the rhythm, the tiny invisible beat that ties it all together. When it's working, you'll feel it, and when it's not, Mel felt it first. He always did. That quotes why the door closed quietly, and why it never opened again.